The morning mist clung to the French countryside like a shroud of death on June 1st, 1918. Captain James Harbert of the United States Marine Corps stood at the edge of a wheat field near Chateau Thierry, watching German artillery shells explode in terrifying succession across the horizon. The Great War had reached a critical juncture, and America's doughboys were about to face their most savage test yet. "Sir, the Germans have broken through at Chemin des Dames," reported Lieutenant Williams, his voice barely audible over the thunderous bombardment. "They're advancing toward Paris faster than anyone anticipated." Harbert lowered his field glasses, his weathered face grim with determination. The German spring offensive, launched 3 months earlier, had shattered British and French lines with unprecedented fury. Now, General Erich Ludendorff's forces stood merely 50 miles from the French capital, closer than they had been since 1914. The dense Belleau would stretch before them like a green fortress, its ancient trees hiding secrets that would soon be written in blood. Intelligence reports indicated that the German 4th Reserve Division had fortified the woods with machine gun nests, barbed wire, and carefully concealed artillery positions. What appeared to be peaceful French forest was actually a death trap engineered by some of Germany's most experienced soldiers. According to historical records from the National Archives, the German forces had spent weeks transforming Belleau Wood into an almost impregnable defensive position. Colonel James Doyen's 4th Marine Brigade had arrived in France just weeks earlier, green recruits from American farms and cities, who had never experienced the mechanized horror of modern warfare. Yet these Marines carried with them an unshakable confidence that would soon earn them legendary status among both allies and enemies. "The French are retreating everywhere," whispered Sergeant Dan Daly, a grizzled veteran whose Medal of Honor from the Boxer Rebellion meant nothing in this hellish landscape. "But we ain't French, and we sure ain't retreating." The German machine guns had already claimed hundreds of Allied casualties. The deadly MG-08 Maxim guns, positioned at strategic points throughout the wood, could fire 600 rounds per minute with devastating accuracy. Each German strong point was supported by overlapping fields of fire, creating kill zones where advancing infantry would be cut down mercilessly. Captain Lloyd Williams of the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, studied the tactical maps with growing concern. The woods represented more than just another battlefield objective. They controlled the vital Paris-Metz highway and threatened the entire Allied defensive line. If the Germans maintained their hold on Belleau Wood, they could continue their advance toward Paris unopposed. As darkness fell on June 1st, the Marines prepared for what many suspected would be their final battle. They cleaned their Springfield rifles, checked their ammunition, and wrote letters home that might never be delivered. The German artillery continued its relentless pounding, each explosion a reminder that death waited in the shadows of the ancient forest. Tomorrow would bring America's baptism by fire in the bloodiest corner of the Western Front, where courage would be measured not in yards gained, but in lives sacrificed for each tree, each rock, each inch of contested ground. Dawn broke on June 2nd, 1918, with the crack of rifle fire echoing through the mist-shrouded wheat fields surrounding Belleau Wood. The German advance had begun before first light, with gray-clad infantry emerging from the forest like ghosts seeking vengeance against the living. Major General Omar Bundy's 2nd Division received urgent orders to halt the German breakthrough at all costs. The fate of Paris itself hung in the balance as Ludendorff's stormtroopers pressed their advantage with ruthless efficiency. These were not the exhausted conscripts of 1917, but elite German troops fresh from the Eastern Front, hardened by years of brutal combat against Russian forces. "Fix bayonets," shouted Captain Williams as German infantry appeared across the open ground. "Make every shot count." The Marines of the 2nd Battalion, 5th Regiment, took their positions along a hastily constructed defensive line. Their Springfield rifles, superior in accuracy to anything the Germans possessed, would soon prove their worth in the hands of marksmen trained on the rifle ranges of Paris Island and Quantico. The first German assault came with typical Prussian precision. Stormtroopers advanced in small groups, using cover and concealment tactics perfected during 4 years of trench warfare. Their potato masher grenades exploded with devastating effect, sending shrapnel whizzing through the morning air like deadly metal rain. Sergeant Daly spotted a German machine gun team setting up their weapon behind a fallen log. Without hesitation, he grabbed his rifle and sprinted forward through a hail of bullets, his Marine training overriding every instinct for self-preservation. "Come on, you sons of bitches, do you want to live forever?" he roared at his men, his voice carrying across the battlefield like a battle cry from ancient warriors. The German MG-08 opened fire. its distinctive chatter drowning out the screams of wounded Marines. But American marksmanship began to take its toll on the advancing enemy. Private First Class Carl Brannan, a farm boy from Mississippi, methodically picked off German officers with his Springfield, each shot carefully aimed despite the chaos surrounding him. By mid-morning, the German advance had stalled against unexpected American resistance. The Marines fought with a ferocity that surprised even veteran German commanders, who had faced British and French forces for years. These Americans seemed to possess an almost supernatural determination, refusing to yield ground even when outnumbered and outgunned. "They fight like Teufel," muttered German Lieutenant Colonel Ernst von Lossberg as he observed the American defensive positions through his periscope. The term "devil dogs" would soon become the Marines' most cherished nickname, earned through blood and courage in the killing fields of France. The battle intensified as German artillery began targeting American positions. With increasing accuracy, high explosive shells burst among the Marines, creating craters that would serve as impromptu graves for both sides. The sweet smell of summer flowers mixed with the acrid stench of curdite and death, creating an atmosphere of surreal horror. Captain Harbert coordinated the defense from a shell-torn farmhouse, his field telephone crackling with reports of German penetrations along various sectors of the line. Each communication brought news of fresh casualties, young Americans dying far from home in a war many barely understood. As the sun reached its zenith on June 2nd, both sides prepared for the decisive phase of the battle. The Germans had failed to achieve their breakthrough, but they still held Belleau Wood and the strategic initiative. The Marines had proven their courage under fire, but the real test lay ahead in the dark depths of the ancient forest. June 6, 1918, marked the beginning of America's first major offensive operation on European soil. The morning air hung thick with anticipation as the 4th Marine Brigade prepared to assault the German positions in Belleau Wood. What lay ahead would transform a peaceful French hunting preserve into the most savage battlefield of the Great War. Colonel Doyen studied the intelligence reports with growing unease. German engineers had spent weeks transforming the natural terrain into a fortress of death. Every clearing had been turned into a killing field, every path blocked with barbed wire and booby traps. Dense undergrowth concealed machine gun nests positioned to create overlapping fields of fire that would cut down attacking infantry like wheat before a scythe. "Gentlemen, we're going into hell itself," Doyen addressed his battalion commanders in the pre-dawn darkness. "But we're Marines, and Marines don't retreat." The German defensive system represented the pinnacle of military engineering. Major General Conte's forces had constructed multiple defensive lines throughout the wood, each designed to channel attacking forces into predetermined kill zones. Communication trenches connected the various strong points, allowing defenders to move reinforcements rapidly to threatened sectors. At precisely 0500 hours, American artillery began the preliminary bombardment. French 7.5s and American 155mm howitzers rained destruction on the German positions, but the thick canopy of ancient oaks and maples absorbed much of the explosive force. The Germans had chosen their defensive positions well, utilizing the natural protection offered by massive tree trunks and rocky outcroppings. Captain Williams led the 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines, into the northern edge of the wood as machine gun fire erupted from concealed positions. The distinctive sound of German Spandau guns mixed with the crack of Mauser rifles to create a symphony of death that would haunt survivors for the rest of their lives. "Keep moving," shouted Gunnery Sergeant Ernest Jansen as his men advanced through the undergrowth. "Don't bunch up." The Germans had learned valuable lessons from years of defensive warfare. Their machine gunners allowed the first wave of Marines to advance deep into the wood before opening fire, trapping the Americans in a deadly crossfire from which there was no escape. Bodies fell among the ferns and wildflowers. Young men from American cities and farms dying in a foreign forest they could never have imagined. Historical accounts from the Marine Corps' archives describe the German defensive positions as among the most sophisticated encountered during the entire war. Private Daniel Daly spotted a German strongpoint built around the massive trunk of a centuries-old oak tree. The position commanded a critical junction of forest paths, and its destruction was essential for continued advance. Without waiting for support, Daly charged forward through a storm of machine gun fire, his bayonet gleaming in the filtered sunlight. The close-quarters combat that followed defied description. Marines and Germans fought hand-to-hand among the trees, using bayonets, trench knives, and rifle butts in struggles that often ended with both combatants dead. The forest floor became carpet with bodies from both sides. Testimony to the savage nature of woodland warfare, Sergeant Major John Quick, a veteran of battles in Cuba and the Philippines, found himself leading a group of Marines against a German strongpoint built into a natural depression. The enemy position bristled with machine guns and was protected by concentric rings of barbed wire that had been cunningly concealed among the natural vegetation. "Marines don't know how to retreat," Quick told his men as they prepared for another assault. "We only know how to attack." By sunset on June 6th, the Marines had gained barely 300 yards into the wood at a cost of over 400 casualties. The German defense had proven more formidable than anyone anticipated, and it became clear that capturing Belleau would require weeks of the most brutal fighting the American military had ever experienced. The ancient trees stood silent witness to man's capacity for both heroism and horror, their branches soon to be decorated with barbed wire instead of leaves. The morning of June 10th, 1918, dawned gray and ominous over Belleau Wood, where the bodies of Marines and Germans lay intermingled among the wildflowers, like some grotesque garden of death. For days of continuous fighting had transformed the peaceful French forest into a nightmare landscape where survival measured itself in minutes rather than hours. Captain Williams crouched in a shell crater beside the corpse of a young German soldier, who couldn't have been more than 18 years old. The boy's pale face stared sightlessly at the canopy above, where machine gun bullets had stripped leaves from branches like a mechanical hurricane. Williams wondered if the German had parents waiting for news that would never come, just like the American mothers who would soon receive telegrams about sons who died fighting for freedom in a foreign land. "Sir, we've located another strong point," reported Corporal Johnson, his uniform torn and bloodstained from days of savage combat. "It's built into that big rock formation about 200 yards ahead." The German defensive positions had been constructed with diabolical ingenuity. Machine gun nests were carved into natural rock formations and camouflaged so expertly that Marines often didn't detect them until the deadly crossfire began. Each position was mutually supporting, creating interlocking fields of fire that turned every advance into a potential massacre. Gunnery Sergeant Jansen studied the German position through his field glasses, noting the carefully placed barbed wire and the fresh earth that indicated recent digging. The enemy had used the natural terrain to maximum advantage, positioning their weapons to cover every possible approach route. "We'll need grenades," Jansen muttered to his squad leaders. "Lots of grenades." The close quarters nature of forest fighting favored neither side exclusively. While the Germans held superior defensive positions, the thick undergrowth allowed small groups of Marines to approach undetected and launch surprise attacks with grenades and bayonets. The fighting had devolved into a series of individual struggles, where personal courage meant more than tactical doctrine. According to combat reports preserved in the National Museum of World War I, the fighting in Belleau Wood represented some of the most intense close-quarters combat experienced by American forces during the entire war. Private First Class Henry Larson had become separated from his unit during the previous day's fighting and spent the night hiding in a shell crater. At dawn, he found himself behind German lines with only his rifle and 6 rounds of ammunition. The farm boy from Iowa faced a choice between surrender and attempting to fight his way back to American positions through enemy-held territory. Larson chose to fight. Moving through the undergrowth with skills learned hunting deer in Iowa woodlands, he methodically stalked German sentries and isolated machine gunners. His Springfield rifle, accurate to 800 yards in open terrain, proved equally deadly at close range among the trees. By noon, he had eliminated 7 German soldiers and captured valuable intelligence about enemy positions. The psychological impact of the fighting began to affect both sides. German soldiers, accustomed to facing war-weary British and French troops, found themselves confronting Americans who fought with fresh determination and seemingly unlimited courage. These Marines refused to retreat even when faced with overwhelming odds, leading German commanders to report that they were fighting a new type of soldier. Captain Harbord coordinated attacks from a hastily constructed command post built into the ruins of a forester's cottage. His field telephone lines were constantly cut by shell fire, forcing him to rely on runners who often died before delivering them messages. Communication became a deadly game where young Marines risked their lives to carry orders that might be obsolete by the time they arrived. "Tell Captain Williams to hold his position," Harbord instructed Corporal Adams. "Reinforcements are coming up from the reserve." Adams sprinted through the forest, dodging sniper fire and exploding shells as he delivered the message that would keep the 3rd Battalion fighting for another day. He never made it back to report completion of his mission, joining the growing number of Marines whose bodies fertilized French soil. As darkness fell on June 10th, both sides prepared for another night of terror in the haunted wood where death lurked behind every tree. June 15, 1918, brought no relief from the carnage that had consumed Belleau for more than a week. The ancient forest had become a charnel house where the living envied the dead, and courage was the only currency that retained its value in the economy of survival. Major General Bundy received disturbing reports from his forward observers. German reinforcements had arrived during the night, including elements of the crack 28th Division fresh from victories on the Eastern Front. These were not the dispirited conscripts of late 1917, but veteran stormtroopers who had learned their trade in the brutal cauldron of trench warfare. "They're bringing up machine guns," reported Captain Harbord during the morning briefing. "Our patrols count at least 20 new positions since yesterday." The German commanders had recognized the strategic importance of Belleau Wood and were determined to hold it at any cost. The forest controlled key roads leading to Paris and provided observation points from which artillery could target Allied supply lines. More importantly, it had become a symbol of German resilience in the face of American aggression. Sergeant Daly led his squad through a nightmare landscape of shattered trees and crater-torn earth. The sweet scent of summer flowers had been replaced by the stench of death and curdite that seemed to cling to everything like an invisible shroud. Bodies from both sides lay where they had fallen, testimony to the savagery of woodland warfare. "Stay low and watch for snipers," Daly whispered to his men as they approached a clearing where German machine guns had previously claimed heavy casualties. The enemy had learned to position their weapons to cover every possible route of advance, creating kill zones where movement meant death. The fighting had evolved into a deadly game of cat and mouse played among ancient trees that had witnessed centuries of human history. Small groups of Marines would infiltrate German positions under cover of darkness, engage in savage hand-to-hand combat, then withdraw before enemy reinforcements could arrive. Each side sought to gain psychological advantage through demonstrations of superior courage and determination. Private First Class Frank Czernetsky, a Polish immigrant from Chicago, discovered a German observation post built high in the branches of a massive oak tree. The position commanded a view of American troop movements and had been directing artillery fire with deadly accuracy. Without hesitation, Czernetsky began climbing the tree while enemy bullets whistled around him like angry hornets. The confrontation that followed epitomized the personal nature of forest combat. Czernetsky and the German observer fought with knives and bare hands 40 feet above the ground, each man knowing that defeat meant death. The struggle ended when both combatants fell from the tree, their bodies found later intertwined in a final embrace of mutual destruction. Contemporary newspaper accounts from the Stars and Stripes describe the fighting in Belleau Wood as the most savage combat yet experienced by American forces in the Great War. Captain Williams received orders to advance his company toward a German strong point known as Hill to 04, a rocky prominence that dominated the southern section of the wood. Intelligence reports indicated that the position was defended by at least 2 machine gun companies and a battery of light mortars. "This is it, boys," Williams told his Marines as they prepared for the assault. "Today we show these Germans what American fighting men can do." The attack began at dawn with a hurricane barrage from American artillery. French 7-5s and captured German guns pounded the German positions for 30 minutes, sending tons of high explosive into the forest canopy. Trees toppled like matchsticks under the bombardment, but the Germans had constructed their positions to withstand such attacks. When the barrage lifted, the Marines advanced through smoke and flamed toward their objective. German machine guns opened fire immediately, their distinctive chatter mixing with the screams of wounded Americans, to create a symphony of horror that would echo through the forest for generations. Gunnery Sergeant Quick led his platoon through a gap in the German wire, his Springfield rifle claiming enemy lives with each carefully aimed shot. The veteran Marine had survived battles in Cuba and the Philippines, but nothing had prepared him for the mechanized slaughter of modern warfare. "Keep moving forward," Quick shouted as his men hesitated under the withering fire. Marines never retreat. By sunset on June 15th, Hill to 04 remained in German hands, but the cost of defending it had been enormous. Both sides had suffered casualties that would have broken lesser units, yet neither showed any inclination to abandon the struggle. The Devil Dogs had earned their name through blood and sacrifice in the depths of a French forest that had become synonymous with American courage. June 25th, 1918, marked 3 weeks since the first shots were fired in the Battle of Belleau Wood, and the ancient forest had become a monument to human endurance in the face of mechanized horror. The trees that had sheltered French hunters for centuries now provided cover for a different kind of hunt, where men stalked each other through undergrowth fertilized by the blood of 2 nations. Colonel Doyen stood before a map covered with red marks indicating Marine casualties. each symbol representing a young American who would never see his homeland again. The cost of fighting in Belleau had exceeded all expectations, but strategic necessity demanded that the offensive continue until the Germans were completely expelled from their forest stronghold. "Gentlemen, today we finish what we started," Doyen addressed his surviving officers in a voice hoarse from weeks of shouting orders. Over artillery fire, intelligence reports indicate that German morale is finally beginning to crack. The assessment was accurate. German commanders had watched their elite units decimated by Marines who fought with a ferocity that defied rational explanation. These Americans seemed to possess an almost supernatural resistance to defeat, continuing to attack even when faced with impossible odds. German soldiers had begun referring to the Marines as Teufelhunden, devil dogs, a nickname that would become a badge of honor for American forces. Captain Williams, now commanding what remained of 2 companies, studied the German positions through his field glasses. The enemy had constructed an intricate system of bunkers and machine gun nests that utilized every natural feature of the terrain. Massive boulders had been hollowed out to create firing positions, and fallen trees had been incorporated into defensive works that blended seamlessly with the forest environment. "Sir, we've identified their command post," reported Lieutenant Morrison, pointing to a concrete bunker barely visible among the trees. "It's about 400 yards northeast of our current position." The German command bunker represented the nerve center of enemy resistance in Belleau. Its destruction would disrupt communications and coordination among the various defensive positions, potentially creating the breakthrough that American forces desperately needed. Sergeant Major Quick assembled a volunteer force of 20 Marines for what everyone knew would be a suicide mission. These men understood that attacking a heavily fortified position in daylight meant probable death, but they also knew that their sacrifice might provide the opening needed for final victory. "Any man who wants to back out can do so now with no questions asked," Quick told his volunteers. "This isn't going to be a Sunday picnic." None of the Marines moved. They had come too far and sacrificed too much to abandon their mission when victory lay within reach. The assault began with a diversionary attack on the German left flank, designed to draw attention away from the main objective. Marines advanced through dense undergrowth, while machine gun fire erupted from concealed positions, like deadly flowers blooming in the forest shadows, according to official Marine Corps records. The final assault on Belleau involved some of the most heroic individual actions in American military history. Private First Class James Finn spotted a German sniper positioned in the branches of a towering pine tree. The enemy marksman had been picking off Marines with methodical precision, his scope-mounted Mauser claiming a victim with almost every shot. Finn borrowed a Springfield rifle from a wounded comrade and began a deadly duel that would be remembered long after the war ended. The sniper duel lasted for over an hour, with both marksmen demonstrating skills that would have been admired under different circumstances. Finn, a former hunting guide from Montana, used every trick learned in the American wilderness to outmaneuver his opponent. The contest ended when Finn's carefully aimed shot found its target, sending the German sniper tumbling from his lofty perch. Meanwhile, Sergeant Major Quick led his volunteers in a frontal assault on the command bunker. German machine guns raked the attacking Marines with devastating fire, but the Americans pressed forward through sheer determination. Quick personally destroyed the machine gun nests with hand grenades before falling mortally wounded. Within sight of his objective, take the bunker, he gasped to Corporal Henderson as life ebbed from his body. "Don't let us die for nothing." Henderson and the surviving Marines stormed the German position in a final burst of savage fighting that epitomized the entire battle. Bayonets clashed with rifle butts in struggles that ended with both combatants dead, while others fought with knives and bare hands in combat too personal for military doctrine to address. When the smoke cleared, the German command bunker was in American hands, but the cost had been enormous. Of the 20 Marines who began the assault, only 6 survived to see the fruits of their victory. June 26, 1918, dawned with an eerie silence over Belleau that seemed almost supernatural. After 3 weeks of continuous gunfire, the ancient trees stood like silent sentinels over a battlefield where courage had been measured, not in yards gained, but in lives sacrificed for each contested foot of French soil. Captain Harbord walked through the forest that had consumed so many young lives, noting the debris of modern warfare scattered among wildflowers that had somehow continued to bloom despite the mechanized horror surrounding them. German helmets lay beside American ones, mute testimony to the democracy of death that recognized no nationality in its harvest of young men. "Sir, we've confirmed that the Germans have withdrawn during the night," reported Lieutenant Morrison. his voice hollow with exhaustion. Belleau would is ours. The victory had come at a price that would haunt survivors for the rest of their lives. The 4th Marine Brigade had suffered over 50% casualties during the 3-week battle, with some companies reduced to barely squad strength. Young men from American farms and cities lay buried in French soil, their dreams and ambitions fertilizing ground that would remember their sacrifice long after the world forgot why they died. Colonel Doyen issued the final communique at 11:30 hours on June 26. Woods now U.S. Marine Corps entirely. The terse message conveyed nothing of the human cost involved in securing this tactical victory, nor did it mention the individual acts of heroism that had made success possible. The German withdrawal had been conducted with typical Prussian efficiency, recognizing that their position had become untenable after the loss of their command bunker. Enemy commanders evacuated their remaining forces under cover of darkness. They left behind a forest transformed into a monument to the savagery of modern warfare. Sergeant Daly, one of the few original non-commissioned officers to survive the entire battle, supervised the collection of American casualties. Each body represented not just a military statistic, but a personal tragedy that would ripple through families and communities across America. These young men had answered their country's call to arms and paid the ultimate price for their devotion to duty. Make sure every man is accounted for, Daly instructed his burial detail. No Marine gets left behind. Historical analysis from the Smithsonian Institution confirms that the Battle of Belleau would establish the United States Marine Corps as an elite fighting force capable of defeating Germany's best troops under the most difficult conditions. The strategic significance of the victory extended far beyond the tactical value of the forest itself. American forces had proven their ability to conduct sustained offensive operations against veteran German troops, demonstrating that the arrival of the American Expeditionary Force had fundamentally altered the balance of power on the Western Front. German commanders filed reports expressing amazement at American fighting qualities. These Marines had displayed a level of individual courage and unit cohesion that surprised officers accustomed to facing war-weary British and French forces. The psychological impact of the defeat would influence German strategic thinking. For the remainder of the war, Private First Class Brannan, now one of the senior men in his decimated company, wrote a letter to his parents in Mississippi. "We have won a great victory here in France, but the cost has been terrible. So many good men will never see home again. Please tell everyone back home that their boys died like heroes, fighting for something bigger than themselves." The French government recognized American sacrifice by officially renaming the battlefield Bois de la Brigade des Marines, Woods of the Marine Brigade. The gesture provided small comfort to the thousands of families who would receive telegrams informing them that their sons had died serving their country with honor and distinction. As the surviving Marines marched away from Belleau toward new battles that awaited them elsewhere on the Western Front, they carried with them the knowledge that they had participated in something extraordinary. They had proven that American fighting men could match the courage and skill of any army in the world, earning respect that would endure long after the guns of the Great War fell silent. The ancient forest returned to its natural silence, but the spirits of young Americans would forever walk among its trees, guardians of freedom who had paid the ultimate price for their beliefs. Their legacy would inspire future generations of Marines who would carry the battle cry retreat, hell, into conflicts not yet imagined, secure in the knowledge that courage and sacrifice had established traditions worthy of any sacrifice required. Belleau would have become hallowed ground, sanctified by the blood of heroes who chose death before dishonor in the service of their country and the cause of human freedom.